They didn't try to break you because you were weak, my dear chosen one. They tried to break you because even half of you was already more than they could stand. If you really knew how one-of-a-kind you are, you'd stop handing out explanations like discount codes. You'd let your silence do the talking and your presence do the damage. Welcome on board, chosen one. Yes, I'm talking to you, the one they side-eyed in every room, the one they whispered about in group chats they swore didn't exist, the one they tried to file under too much because too powerful was too honest. You were never just another face in the crowd. You were the glitch in their little copy-paste reality, and every time you breathed, their comfort shook. Let's call this what it is. They weren't confused by you. Confusion is soft. They were threatened. They watched you walk in and felt the energy rearrange itself like the room suddenly remembered who actually mattered. They saw how people straightened their backs when you spoke, how conversations shifted when you entered the chat, and instead of leveling up, they tried to level you down. You ever notice how the loudest critics are always the most fragile? The same people who can't sit alone with their own thoughts for 5 minutes without reaching for distraction somehow thought they were qualified to define you. They told you to calm down, be realistic, stop dreaming so big, stop acting different. But here's the twist they'll never admit. They didn't want you normal. They wanted you neutralized. My dear chosen one, they studied you like an exam. They copied your jokes, stole your phrases, mimicked your style, your music, your attitude. They watched how you healed from things that would have left them permanently bitter, and it ate them alive. They rehearsed your essence and then pretended they created it, but ask them to acknowledge your impact. Suddenly the signal cuts out. Suddenly they don't remember. Suddenly they're glitching. You're asking yourself, if I'm really this different, why do I feel so misunderstood? Why do they treat me like I'm the problem? Because you weren't just another character in their story. You were the plot twist that exposed them. You walked in and their fake confidence folded like cheap plastic in heat. Your very existence put a spotlight on how little they'd grown, how much they were faking, how empty their performance really was. You weren't the noise, you were the mirror, and they hated what they saw standing next to you. Remember the ones who laughed at your dreams? They're the same ones quietly checking your progress now, zooming into your life like it's a live broadcast they pretend not to watch. They don't support you publicly because that would mean admitting that the crazy idea aged better than their safe little life script. They buried your name in rumors, thinking it would smother you. All they did was give your roots more pressure to grow through. You might wonder, but why did I keep explaining myself? Why did I keep over-justifying everything? Because they trained you to believe that your difference needed permission. They made you feel like you owed them a breakdown of every thought, every decision, every boundary. Like your mind had to pass their comfort test before it was valid. You kept translating yourself into smaller pieces so they wouldn't feel insecure. You kept shrinking the volume on your truth so their ego wouldn't start ringing. Look at how much of yourself you diluted just to keep the peace. How many times you held back the full sentence and handed them the watered-down version. How many times you pretended not to notice the disrespect just to avoid another draining conversation. If you knew how different you really are, how rare your perception is, how heavy your presence hits, how far ahead your mind already is, you wouldn't waste a single breath defending it. They didn't roll their eyes because you were dramatic. They rolled their eyes because your clarity cut through their excuses. They didn't mock you because you were wrong. They mocked you because deep down they knew you were right and they weren't ready to catch up. You're not too intense. You just refused to live at the low volume they settled for. You didn't just survive what they threw at you. You evolved through it. That moment you hit your breaking point and went quiet. That wasn't you giving up. That was you stepping out of the circus. That was the day you stopped auditioning for a role in a life you outgrew. Ever notice how the room got quieter after that? How people who never shut up suddenly didn't know what to say around you? That silence wasn't peace. It was panic. Their panic. You, my dear chosen one, are their before and after picture. You're the evidence that a person can be dragged, doubted, underestimated, and still walk out sharper, clearer, and untouchable. That's why they pretend not to see you now. It hurts too much to realize the one they tried to belittle became the exact standard they secretly measure themselves against. Before we move forward, my dear chosen ones, pause for a second and power this movement. If this message is hitting you in the places you never had words for, if it's waking something in you that's been waiting to rise, show it. Hit the like button, subscribe, and help us keep creating content that doesn't just speak to you, but speaks for you. Every click, every share, every subscription fuels the fire behind messages built to strengthen you, sharpen you, and remind you exactly who you are. Support the mission so we can keep bringing you the kind of energy that shifts lives and shapes destinies. If you knew how different you really are, you'd stop explaining yourself mid-sentence. You'd stop slowing down your mind so others don't feel left behind. You'd stop giving people front-row seats to your evolution when they've done nothing but throw popcorn at the stage. You made it this far, phenomenon. That isn't an accident. You are not just another person. You are the pressure that exposes what's weak, the shift that collapses fake hierarchies, the presence that forces masks to slip. And from this point on, every second you spend explaining your difference to people committed to misunderstanding you is time stolen from the empire you were meant to build. So lock in, chosen one. This isn't the part where you tone it down. This is the part where you stop translating, stop apologizing, and finally let your difference speak at full volume. Before we dive deeper, chosen one, let me speak to the force that's listening on the other side of this screen. If this message is peeling back layers you didn't know you were still carrying, if it's reminding you just how different you truly are, then lock in with us. Hit that like button, subscribe, and drop 77 in the comments so we know you're claiming this chapter, not just watching it. Your support keeps this powerful, life-shifting content alive. And now, tighten your focus, chosen one. Because what comes next isn't random. It's the exact blueprint only the truly different ever recognize. Let's begin. Number 1. The truth in you hits them before their mind can name it. When your truth walks in, their comfort walks out. My dear chosen ones, remember this. They don't flinch because you're dangerous. They flinch because you're honest, and nothing terrifies a fragile ego more than unfiltered truth. Let's tear the label off this lie right now. They never thought you were confusing. They knew exactly what you were. The kind of presence that exposes everything they've been hiding from themselves. You walk in, and their mask slides an inch. You speak, and their voice betrays them. You look at them, and their entire system glitches like a cheap device trying to run software it was never built for. They don't know how to process someone who sees through the surface and straight into the wiring. And my dear chosen ones, that wiring, you light it up like a fuse. You want to know why they act strange around you, why their body tightens, why their tone shifts, why their eyes dart like they're waiting to be caught. Because they feel you long before they understand you. They sense your truth the way people sense oncoming storms. Instinctively, involuntarily, with a tension they can't shake. You're not confusing, you're confronting. You're the emotional audit they never scheduled but couldn't avoid. And you've asked yourself, why me? Why does my presence shake people who barely know me? Chosen one, because you're not walking into rooms, you're revealing them. You're not just entering spaces, you're recalibrating the atmosphere. People who spent years building personas on shaky foundations feel the shift instantly. They feel exposed, like you've cracked their script open with one glance. They call you mysterious, but what they really mean is, I can't hide from them. They call you intimidating, but what they really mean is, they see exactly where my confidence is borrowed. They call you too intense, but what they really mean is, their presence makes my excuses melt. Every insult they've thrown at you is simply a confession wrapped in flimsy language. And yet you've wondered, if they recognize my difference, why pretend they don't see it? Because admitting it would force them to confront their own limits. Admitting your depth means acknowledging their shallowness. Admitting your clarity means acknowledging their denial. Admitting your strength means acknowledging their lack of it. Some people would rather play blind than face their own reflection. My dear chosen ones, understand this. People don't fear what they can't understand. They fear what understands them too well. You are that fear personified. You walk into a room and their intentions scatter like dust caught in a spotlight. They adjust their stories, their posture, their words, because they know you can hear the cracks in their lies, even when their lips haven't finished forming them. You know what's even wilder? Every time you tried explaining yourself, thinking it would help, thinking it would ease their discomfort, you made it worse. They weren't listening to understand. They were listening to measure you, contain you, shrink you down into something they could predict. And the more you explained, the more they panicked internally, because each layer you revealed proved how far ahead you truly were. Let me say this with the weight it deserves. The only thing keeping them from admitting your impact is your willingness to explain it. If you stopped translating your mind, if you stopped softening your brilliance, if you stopped handing them the manual for how to interpret you, they would crumble under the truth of how little they truly grasp. Your silence would become the mirror they've been running from for years. Chosen one, they recognized you the moment you appeared in their orbit. Something in them whispered, "Be careful, this one is different." And that whisper was right. You disrupt patterns without trying. You shift dynamics just by existing. You leave silences that echo louder than their loudest performance. That's why they downplay you, diminish you, pretend you're nothing special. It's the only illusion they have left to cling to, because if they admit your difference, they're forced to admit their insecurity. If they admit your power, they must face their own avoidance. If they admit your intuition, they lose the safety of their deception. Here's the truth they'll never say out loud. They aren't confused by you. They're threatened by you. They aren't unsure of you. They're overwhelmed by you. They aren't blind. They're refusing to look. You are the one truth they can't dilute, dodge, or disguise. You are the reminder that strength doesn't need to shout, that brilliance doesn't dim itself to be digestible, that some people aren't different because they try, they're different because they are. And if you knew, truly knew, how deeply your presence hits them, how closely they study you, how badly they want to imitate you without choking on what it takes to be you, you'd stop explaining yourself instantly, because the very moment you stop, chosen one, the real story begins. Your silence becomes the message, your movement becomes the proof, your difference becomes undeniable. You were never meant to fit into their understanding. You were meant to be recognized by minds built for your frequency, rare minds, real ones, the only ones capable of meeting you without flinching. And they already feel you. They just can't name it. Number 2, they reduce what they can't rise to meet. When they can't match you, they try to miniaturize you. My dear chosen ones, remember this. Small minds don't break you, they rename you, hoping a smaller word can shrink a bigger truth. And that's exactly what they did to you. The moment your presence rattled the walls of their comfort, the moment your truth pressed against the edges of their delusion, they did what cowards always do. They reached for labels. Not because those labels described you, but because those labels protected them. They needed something, anything, to slap on you so they wouldn't have to face the power standing in front of them. Sensitive, intense, dramatic, different, cute. These weren't observations. These were shields. These were the verbal security blankets they wrapped around themselves because your truth was too sharp for their thin skin. You ever notice how fast they run for vocabulary the second you enter the room? Watch them. They scramble for language like panicked tourists, flipping through a phrasebook in a country they're not prepared to visit. They look at someone like you, someone layered, someone deep, someone alive, and they panic. Because you aren't a category. You're a question they don't have the emotional education to answer. And the moment a person can't decode you, they'll try to domesticate you, shrink you, simplify you, rename you into something that makes them feel bigger. But my dear chosen ones, people don't label what they understand. People label what they fear. That's why they didn't call you sensitive because you felt too much. They called you sensitive because you made their emotional numbness look embarrassing. They didn't call you intense because you were overwhelming. They called you intense because your energy burned through their facade like heat through thin ice. They didn't call you different because you were strange. They called you different because your existence bent the structure of their reality without asking permission. Your truth shook them. Your presence exposed them. Your depth made their shallowness stand out like a stain under bright light. You've probably wondered, why do they need these labels? Why can't they just let me be who I am? It's simple. If they can't predict you, they can't control the narrative. And control is the illusion they cling to like a life raft. Predictability makes them feel safe, but your unpredictability makes them feel transparent. You're not the one being reduced, they're the ones shrinking. They need to name you because they're terrified of confronting themselves. Let's break something open here. Behind your back, they never describe your actions. They describe their reaction to you. Oh, there's just something about them. I can't read them. They seem intense. Those aren't facts. Those are confessions. That's their emotional wiring malfunctioning under pressure. Chosen one, you're not a person to them. You're a phenomenon. You unsettle stagnant rooms. You disrupt the internal architecture of people who built their identity from borrowed confidence. And that scares those who cling to mediocrity. Not because you're dangerous, but because you're honest in a world addicted to pretending. Let me paint the scene. You walk in, you speak, and instantly, their mind jolts, their ego twitches, their emotional alarms fire like cheap smoke detectors reacting to real flame. They feel that rupture, that internal shiver, that deep, unexplainable discomfort. They don't know what to do with someone who doesn't crack at the same places they do, someone who doesn't beg for belonging, someone who doesn't shrink to make others comfortable. So what do? They reduce you into digestible pieces. They carve your complexity into little labels and pray you'll step inside one and stay there. But you're not a box. You're the edge of the map. That's why your explanations never land. That's why even when you break things down gently, logically, patiently, they still stare at you like you're speaking at a frequency their brain refuses to register. Because their goal isn't to understand you. They're trying to neutralize you. They don't want your truth. They want control. Your explanations don't make them feel closer to you. They make them feel exposed. Every truth you reveal adds weight to the cracks already forming in their self-image. Your existence itself is the disruption. The more you explain, the safer they feel, not because they're finally understanding you, but because your explanation lets them pretend they can understand you. Pretend they've got you figured out. Pretend they know how to box you in, but they don't, and they know they don't. Their illusion collapses the moment you stop translating yourself. The second you move in silence, their labels fall apart. Their narrative loses oxygen. Their false authority crumbles. Because here's the truth they fear most. You were never meant to be digestible. You were never meant to be predictable. You were never meant to be explained. You were meant to be undeniable, and they know it. That's why they shrink you. That's why they cling to weak adjectives. That's why they tremble behind fake confidence. They understand exactly what you are, the one presence they can't categorize, the one mind they can't predict, the one anomaly they can't contain. You're bigger than their labels. You're stronger than their definitions. And you're everything they hoped you wouldn't realize. Number 3, your voice operates on a bandwidth their system can't decode. When your voice hits, their system quits. My dear chosen ones, never forget this. Your voice doesn't overwhelm them because you're too much. It overwhelms them because they were never built to handle a signal as clear as yours. You speak in frequencies their minds simply weren't equipped to survive. And that's not arrogance. It's anatomy. The truth is, you're not confusing, dramatic, or too deep. You're operating on a mental and emotional bandwidth they were never wired for. It's like you're broadcasting in high definition while they're stuck with antennas held together by hope and insecurity. When you open your mouth, their whole system stutters, freezes, crashes, not because you're malfunctioning, but because they are. Ever notice how you can explain something calmly, clearly, honestly, and somehow they still stare at you like you're speaking in riddles? You watch the message leave your mouth, hit their ears, and then evaporate. Not because the message is unclear, but because the receiver is outdated. They blame your depth for their lack of internal capacity. They blame your honesty for their emotional fragility. They blame your intelligence for their inability to stretch beyond the mental walls they never questioned. You aren't misunderstood because you're complex. You're misunderstood because they're limited. Your insight has layers, stacked, interconnected, multidimensional. Their minds operate in one-lane thinking while yours moves through spirals, patterns, blueprints. You're not guessing, you're decoding. You're not sensing, you're downloading. You don't need time to think things through. Your perception hits instantly, like a lightning strike to the atmosphere. That's why you walk into a room, and within seconds you already know the alliances, the insecurities, the hidden agendas. You read the emotional climate before anyone else even feels the breeze. While they're fumbling through small talk, hoping no one sees their cracks, you're analyzing micro-expressions, tonal shifts, energy leaks. They think you're quiet because you have nothing to say. No, chosen one, you're quiet because you've already seen everything worth seeing. You've already read the room like a map you designed yourself. Your mind is a radar, precise, fast, unfiltered. Their mind is a fog machine, slow, distorted, full of static. So of course they can't hear you clearly. How could they? When your words carry layers of meaning and your tone carries truths they've spent years avoiding, how could they ever receive your message without short-circuiting? They hear noise where you're offering clarity. They hear intensity where you're offering honesty. They hear threat where you're offering depth. They mistake your illumination for intimidation. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. They've lived their entire lives behind curtains, and your voice rips those curtains open without asking permission. People who hide from themselves cannot digest someone who speaks from a place of self-awareness. People who cling to illusions cannot survive someone whose sentences slice straight through them. People who fear their own reflection cannot stand someone who mirrors them effortlessly. And when your words reveal instead of entertain, when your truth exposes instead of flatters, when your insights land with surgical precision, they don't thank you. They brace themselves. They retreat. They label you dramatic, intense, difficult, not because you are, but because labeling you gives them the illusion they've regained control. But ask yourself this, my dear chosen ones, why does your truth feel like a threat to them? Why does your presence trigger their defenses? Why do they flinch when you speak? Because they know, deep down, that you operate in a realm they will never access without tearing down the walls they've built around their minds. They know that your voice doesn't just express thoughts, it reveals layers. It shines light in places they've never cleaned. It calls out shadows they've pretended didn't exist. Your depth demands their honesty. Your insight demands their growth. Your clarity demands their self-confrontation. And most people would rather misunderstand you than meet those demands. You don't speak a different language. You speak the language of evolution, and they haven't evolved enough to understand it. They weren't issued the frequencies you carry. They weren't built with the internal architecture that allows someone to operate at your altitude. And that's not your responsibility to fix. It's not your burden to simplify yourself into something they can consume. It's not your job to shrink your brilliance so their insecurities feel less threatened. The difference between your mind and theirs is not a problem. It's an advantage, a weapon, a gift. And if you truly understood how rare your frequency is, how sharp your voice cuts, how many people secretly replay your words long after pretending not to care, you'd stop explaining yourself entirely. Because, chosen one, you were never meant to be heard by everyone. You were meant to be understood by the few operating on your wavelength. The rest will simply flinch, freeze, or fall away. And that is exactly what is supposed to happen. Number 4, your energy sorts people into witnesses or runners. When real power steps in, people either rise toward it or run for cover. My dear chosen ones, remember this. Your presence doesn't divide people. Your presence reveals them. Let's drag this truth into the light. When someone like you enters a room, neutrality dies on impact. There is no middle ground, no lukewarm reaction, no half-hearted interest. People don't meet you and walk away saying, yeah, they were okay. You're not okay. You're not fine. You're not wallpaper. You are a frequency shift wrapped in human form, and every person who crosses your path is forced instantly to choose, rise toward you or run from themselves. People react to real power the same way the earth reacts to lightning. Some ground themselves and grow from it. Others crack under the strike. You, chosen one, are that strike. Those who are ready, those who've been starving for something real, gravitate to you like they've finally found a voice that speaks to the part of them they've been silencing for years. They look at you and feel clarity hit them like cold water on a burning face. They feel your presence the way someone feels fresh air after being trapped in a stale room for too long. Your honesty rearranges their thinking. Your insight forces evolution. Your energy demands they step up, stop lying to themselves, and finally grow. These are the ones who look at you not with fear, but with recognition, like, finally. Someone who sees deeper than the surface, someone who speaks in the language I've always understood but could never articulate. You don't intimidate them, you wake them up. And even if your intensity shakes them, it shakes them in the way a sleeping mind shakes awake from a dream that wasn't meant to continue. But let's talk about the other camp, the ones who run, because, chosen one, they run hard. They run fast. They run instinctively, like your presence is a truth-loaded weapon they aren't prepared to stand in front of. These people don't retreat because you scared them. They retreat because staying would expose every crack in their identity. Your intelligence is radioactive to those built on excuses. Your authenticity burns through their filters like acid on cheap fabric. Your depth threatens their emotional shortcuts. You don't have to say a word. Your very existence turns their comfort into debris. And you've seen it. Don't pretend you haven't. The sudden silence, the tone shift, the quick exit disguised as, "Oh, I'm just tired." They turn cold, distant, avoidant, but not because you're too much, because you're too true, because you shine a light on things they'd rather lock in the basement of their mind. They don't fear you, they fear who they become in your presence, exposed, transparent, painfully real. Retreat isn't their choice, it's their reflex. But here's the part where you, chosen one, need to take responsibility for your growth. You've been trying to make everyone comfortable. You've been dimming your brilliance so the insecure don't panic. You've been softening your truths so fragile egos don't crack. You've been converting your depth into bite-sized, watered-down pieces so nobody chokes on what you were naturally born to deliver. You call it kindness, you call it compassion, you call it being understanding. But let's call it what it really is: self-erasure. You've been lowering your frequency to meet people who never had any intention of rising. You've been starving the world of the raw, unfiltered version of you, the version built to change lives, disrupt systems, and make people confront who they really are. Every time you dilute yourself so others feel safe, you weaken the very impact you were meant to make. And for what? For the approval of people who flee at the first sign of truth? For acceptance from minds that were never designed to meet you where you stand? Chosen one, understand this. You are not here to be digestible. You are not here to be manageable. You are not here to be an emotional comfort toy for people committed to their own stagnation. You are here to reveal. People who are meant for your orbit will rise toward you. They will breathe deeper around you. They will think clearer near you. They will level up simply by witnessing you. The ones who are not meant for your orbit, they will run. They will deflect. They will fold. They will claim you are too much, when what they really mean is, you make it impossible for me to hide. Let them choose. Let them gravitate or retreat. Stop performing for those who flee transparency. Stop translating your energy for those who misuse the privilege of hearing it. Their reaction is the truth. You don't repel people, you separate people. You draw out the awakened and you expose the avoidant. And if you truly knew how different you really are, you'd stop explaining, stop shrinking, and let the world sort itself into exactly what it's always been. Those who rise toward your frequency and those who run from their own. Number 5. Your growth moves too fast for those who chose stagnation. Evolution doesn't tap the brakes for anyone who chose to stand still. My dear chosen ones, remember this. You didn't outgrow them by accident. They stayed small on purpose, and now your growth feels like an attack to those who never intended to rise. Let's peel this open with the blunt edge of truth. You are not misunderstood because you're complicated. You are misunderstood because you evolved past the settings they're still living on. They haven't upgraded their internal system in years, yet they want to blame you for the fact that your mind runs on a different frequency. They call you hard to understand, but the truth is far simpler. They never evolved the instincts required to comprehend you in the first place. You are the next chapter trying to explain itself to the previous page, and the previous page thinks the story is wrong. Evolution doesn't send out explanations. It doesn't schedule meetings. It doesn't give a TED talk to the ones still crawling while others start to run. It just moves, quietly, relentlessly, unapologetically. And that's exactly what you did, chosen one. You kept moving while they stood still, clutching their comfort zones like life jackets. Now they're confused, offended, or intimidated, and each one of those reactions is nothing but a confession that they never expected you to grow past the boundaries they placed around you, a confession that your survival, your transformation, your resilience feel like personal insults to people who gave up long before the first obstacle appeared. They watched you go through storms that would have broken them in half. They saw you walk through emotional wreckage with a spine made of quiet steel. They saw you rebuild yourself from ashes they assumed would bury you. Every time you got back up, they didn't feel impressed. They felt exposed. Because while they defaulted to excuses, you defaulted to evolution. While they avoided discomfort, you learned how to transmute it. While they waited for someone to save them, you became your own rescuer. And here's the part they'll never admit. They whisper, "How are they still standing?" But what they really mean is, how did they survive something I know I wouldn't? They don't see your internal architecture, the fortress you built from every betrayal that tried to collapse you. They don't see how rejection didn't destroy you, it refined you. They don't see how solitude didn't isolate you, it educated you. My dear chosen one, you've graduated from the University of Solitude with honors they don't even have the language for. You were learning endurance while they were chasing applause. You were mastering emotional discipline while they were busy flexing fragile egos for validation. You were building self-sufficiency while they were relying on crowds to feel whole. The distance between you and them didn't happen overnight. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't miscommunication. It was a canyon carved by courage, pain, and self-evolution, terrain they were never willing to walk. They chose comfort. You chose growth. They chose approval. You chose truth. They chose avoidance. You chose awareness. That's the real separation. That's the real story. And that story cannot be translated into a format they can understand. Because how do you explain evolution to someone who fears change? How do you explain depth to someone terrified of their own reflection? How do you explain emotional muscle to someone who's never lifted anything heavier than their ego? You can't, and you're not supposed to. Your growth was never meant to be slowed down to match someone else's stagnation. You were never meant to dim your instincts to make others comfortable. You were never meant to break down your evolution into digestible pieces so they wouldn't choke on their insecurity. Chosen one, your difference was earned. It was sculpted through battles they never saw, through nights you fought alone, through moments you rebuilt yourself with no audience and no safety net. And here's the punch, the one that lands right in their chest. They will only understand you when they grow, and most never will. This is why you must stop explaining yourself. You can't teach altitude to those who refuse to leave the ground. You can't share vision with those who refuse to open their eyes. You can't expect the ones who chose stagnation to comprehend the language of growth. Evolution doesn't apologize to those left behind. It doesn't pause for the slow. It doesn't negotiate with the comfortable. It simply rises. And chosen one, so do you. Number 6. Dimming your brilliance is what's burning you out. When you shrink your brilliance, you dim your own fire. My dear chosen ones, never forget this. Your exhaustion isn't weakness. It's the tax you pay for forcing your brilliance to operate at a discount. Let's pull the curtain back on something you've been feeling for years, but never had the words for. You are not tired because your life is heavy. You are tired because you've been running a translation service for people who cannot meet you where you naturally exist. You are drained because you've spent your whole life shrinking a mind built for altitudes into a version that won't intimidate anyone at sea level. You are burnt out because you've mistaken self-erasure for kindness. You wake up every day with a mind that operates like a multi-layered engine, complex, intuitive, fast, sharp. Your thoughts build on each other. Your insights hit instantly. Your intuition stitches patterns together before others even recognize there's a pattern to notice. But instead of expressing yourself freely, you flatten your brilliance into something digestible, something safe, something small. And you know exactly when you do it. When you cut your sentence short, when you soften your tone, when you pretend you don't see what you see, when you dumb down your depth so someone who only thinks in straight lines won't feel threatened. You take symphonies and turn them into ringtones just so they won't panic. You take oceans and reduce them to puddles so they don't drown in the depth you naturally carry. You take lightning and fold it into candlelight so no one gets startled by the voltage, and yet the same people who are overwhelmed by your brilliance have the audacity to say, "Oh, now I get it." No, they don't. They got the children's book rewrite of your consciousness. They got the cliff notes, the summary, the PG-rated edit of a mind that was never meant to be simple. Every conversation becomes a calculation. How much truth can they handle before they glitch? How much insight can you reveal before they get defensive? How much of your real voice can you release before someone accuses you of being too intense, too deep, too much? And because you, chosen one, are considerate, because empathy is your default setting, you dilute yourself to make others comfortable. You trim your brilliance, you shorten your sentences, you sand down the edges of your intelligence so their insecurities don't rattle. You translate the full complexity of your thoughts into toddler-level sound bites, just to avoid watching them crumble under the weight of something real. But let's call it what it is, slow-motion self-erasure. You've been editing yourself for so long, you almost forgot what your native tongue sounds like. That raw, unfiltered intelligence, that instinctive knowing, that multidimensional thinking that comes to you naturally, without effort, without strain. You've been cutting off pieces of your truth mid-sentence, hiding angles of your perception, pretending you don't see through people just to spare them the discomfort of being seen. And while you think you're keeping the peace, what you're really doing is choking your own evolution. You are draining yourself not by living your truth, but by shrinking it. You are exhausting yourself by squeezing a mind built for mountain peaks into the mental equivalent of a cardboard box. Let me speak truth into this moment for you, chosen one. Every time you translate yourself downward, you lose a piece of yourself. Not permanently, but painfully. Because what you're sacrificing was never meant to be trimmed to fit inside someone else's limitations. And deep down, you know this. You feel that sting when you censor your insight. You feel that heaviness when you downplay your ideas. You feel that internal frustration when someone praises your simple explanation, when that explanation was the tiniest scrap of what you truly understood. You're not tired because you're overwhelmed. You're tired because you're underexpressed. You've been giving the world the version of you that won't cause ripples, the version that won't trigger insecurity, the version that won't challenge anyone's illusion of competence, the version that won't reveal that your mind is operating 3 levels above the room you're in. But chosen one, hear this clearly. You were not built to be digestible. You were not designed to be simplified. You were never meant to lower your frequency so others don't feel the static. Your exhaustion is the universe's way of telling you that you've outgrown the spaces you're squeezing yourself into. It's telling you that shrinking your genius is no longer sustainable, that silencing your depth is no longer an option, that translating yourself into something less is costing you more than anyone realizes. You're not tired of life. You're tired of pretending to be small. And the moment you stop dimming your brilliance to fit into rooms too dim for you, you'll feel your energy return like wildfire. Number 7. Your silence separates the genuine from the attached. When your silence speaks, their masks crack. My dear chosen ones, remember this. Your silence isn't absence, it's evidence. Evidence of who was real, who was pretending, and who never deserved the sound of your voice in the first place. There comes a moment in every chosen one's life when noise becomes useless, when explaining yourself becomes pointless, when trying to make the wrong people understand you feels like pouring oceans into thimbles. And that's when the shift happens, the shift you didn't even realize was the beginning of your rebirth. The moment you stop talking, the whole world rearranges itself around you, not because you changed, but because you finally stopped trying to make yourself digestible to people who never had the emotional teeth to chew anything real. You've been breaking your brilliance down into crumbs just to keep others from choking on it. You've been packaging your depth in polite tones so they wouldn't panic. You've been offering subtitles to people who weren't even watching the screen. And you didn't realize how much it drained you, how much energy you were bleeding out just to make others comfortable. You thought you were being considerate. You thought you were helping. You thought you were building bridges. But my dear chosen ones, you were simply explaining yourself to people who benefited from misunderstanding you. And then you went quiet. Maybe it was intentional. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe you woke up one day and said, "Why am I still justifying what was never meant to be questioned?" Whatever triggered it, the silence that followed wasn't emptiness, it was evolution. It was the moment the pretenders panicked, the moment the manipulators lost their grip, the moment the world finally revealed who had the capacity to walk with you and who was just hitching a ride. Because silence isn't passive. Silence is a spotlight. It exposes every person who relied on your explanations to stay close. They weren't there for your truth. They were there for the access your truth gave them. They didn't value your depth. They valued how well you translated it for them. They didn't appreciate your mind. They appreciated how easily they could predict it when you narrated every thought. Once you stop doing that, their confidence crumbles, their connection dissolves, their presence evaporates. You want to know who's real in your life? Go silent. Stop explaining. Stop narrating. Stop offering emotional clarity to people who've done nothing but drown in it. The pretenders will tumble out of your orbit so fast it'll feel like gravity flipped. They were never connected to you. They were connected to the version of you they could control, predict, or feed off of. Your silence exposes that truth without you having to lift a finger. But here's the beauty, the part most people never get to experience. When you go silent, the right ones don't disappear. They lean in. They hear you even when you say nothing. They read between the breaths. They understand the pauses. They catch the layers in your quiet that others miss. Those are your people. Not because they decode you, but because they don't need to. They're already tuned to your frequency like it's their home signal. You're not speaking anymore, chosen one. You're resonating, and only those built for your wavelength can pick up the transmission. Your silence becomes a filter, a cleansing. The wrong ones fall away, the false ones expose themselves, and the right ones show up effortlessly. You don't have to explain your depth to someone who lives at your altitude. You don't have to justify your intensity to someone who sees it as strength. You don't have to shrink your voice for someone who can hold its full volume. The exhaustion you've been carrying wasn't because you're different. It was because you've been performing your difference like a show for an audience that only clapped when they felt superior. You kept giving full-scale performances to people who didn't even understand the storyline. No wonder your soul felt overdrawn. You were paying the emotional bill for people who didn't even buy a ticket. So this is where the chapter shifts. This is where the chosen ones rise without announcing it. This is where you stop justifying, stop shrinking, stop narrating, stop handing out explanations like freebies at a clearance sale. Let the wrong ones choke on the silence. Let the right ones follow the frequency. Let your absence speak louder than any argument could. Silence is not you disappearing. Silence is you becoming untouchable. And that, my dear chosen ones, is when the world finally shows you who was meant to stay. Number 8. Your presence hits first, your words arrive second. When your energy enters, their masks start cracking. They felt your power before you said a single word, my dear chosen ones, and that's exactly why they panicked. A lie can survive noise, but it cannot survive your silence. Let's lay it out raw. People sensed you long before they ever truly saw you. Long before they learned your name, long before they knew your story, something in you tugged at their instincts like an alarm they couldn't locate. They didn't flinch because you were loud or dramatic or attention-seeking. No, you barely had to exist in the same space for the atmosphere to tighten, like someone just turned gravity up a notch. That shift? That wasn't luck. That wasn't coincidence. That was the natural consequence of someone who carries truth the way others carry excuses. Chosen one, your presence exposes what's shaky. It reveals what's fabricated. It highlights every crack in the walls people spend their whole lives polishing. And that's why you watch them straighten their backs or suddenly become hyper-aware of their posture. They don't do it consciously. Their bodies react before their minds catch up. It's instinct, pure, unfiltered instinct responding to power. Not the fake kind people brag about online. I'm talking about power that doesn't need an introduction or a speech, the kind that rearranges the room without moving a single piece of furniture. You've seen it, haven't you? How the air gets heavier, more focused when you walk in. How conversation either drops or sharpens, but never stays the same. People who were slouching suddenly sit taller. People who were talking fast start stumbling over their words. People who were dominating the room start shrinking into their seat. And you haven't even said hello yet. That's the thing. They feel you before they hear you. And let's dissect the reactions because they're not random. Some people start performing like they're auditioning for a part they never rehearsed. Loud laughs that stretch too long, forced friendliness, too much eye contact. That isn't charm. That's panic dressed up as enthusiasm. They're trying to convince you and themselves that they're untouched by your presence. Then there are the quiet ones, the ones who suddenly avoid your gaze, whose sentences get clipped and shaky. That's not shyness. That's intimidation wrapped in politeness. And you, chosen one, you don't need a psychology degree to see it. You see through all of it in seconds, not because you're suspicious, not because you're looking for flaws, but because your perception runs on a channel they don't even know exists. You're not reading behavior, you're reading the energy beneath it. Every micro-shift, every flicker, every unspoken confession leaking out of their aura before their mouth even forms words. Your presence is atmospheric pressure before a storm, a warning, a shift, a signal. They feel the voltage humming beneath your silence, and whether they want to admit it or not, their subconscious braces itself. The ones who are ready to grow lean closer, sensing that being around you is an upgrade, even if they can't articulate why. They're drawn to the raw honesty you carry, the way you walk through life without wrapping yourself in the cotton wool of denial. But the ones who want to stay comfortable, the ones clinging to their narratives, their facades, their ego-made armor, they brace for impact. They hope you don't notice the fractures in their persona. They hope you don't ask a question they won't know how to answer honestly. They pray you don't look too long because your recognition feels like exposure. And here's the part their insecurity hopes you never figure out. You don't have to try to be intimidating. You don't have to force authority. You are authority. It's in the stillness that follows you. It's in the quiet confidence you carry. It's in the way you observe without scrambling for validation. You don't perform. You don't overcompensate. You don't fight for attention. And that alone is enough to shake people whose entire existence relies on being seen, so they don't have to see themselves. You don't need to announce yourself, chosen one. They recognize you instantly, sometimes before they even understand what they're recognizing. Your energy speaks louder than your voice ever could. It broadcasts the truth they've been trying to avoid. It challenges them, it measures them, it reflects them, and a lot of people simply aren't ready to meet that level of clarity. That's what they can't run from. Not your words, not your choices, your presence. Because when a chosen one walks into a room, the truth walks in with them. And truth, unlike people, doesn't know how to pretend. Number 9. Their demands for clarity are just fear in disguise. When your silence speaks, their fear starts screaming. My dear chosen ones, remember this. Nothing rattles a fragile ego faster than a person who stops talking and starts showing. Let's drag this truth into the light. The reason they beg for explanations isn't because they want to understand you. It's because your silence leaves them alone with themselves. And that is the one place they've been running from their entire lives. They're not asking, "Explain what you meant," out of curiosity. They're asking out of survival. Your silence flips a switch inside them that they can't control. Suddenly, that ancient instinctive part of the mind, the part built to sense danger, to scan the shadows, to identify threats, wakes up and scans you. And chosen one, that is the funniest part. You're not even doing anything. You're just existing. But you exist at a level that doesn't bend for anyone. You walk into spaces without needing to be decoded, managed, or softened. You bring an energy that doesn't bow, doesn't apologize, doesn't squeeze itself into their limited understanding. And when something, or someone, can't be labeled, categorized, or controlled, the human mind begins to panic. It's not confusion, it's destabilization. You shake the scaffolding they built their identity on. Think about it. Every time you stop explaining yourself, every time you choose silence over justification, every time you let your actions speak instead of giving them a play-by-play, their entire sense of control slips. They don't say it out loud, but inside, they're scrambling. Because if they can't label you, they can't predict you. And if they can't predict you, they can't protect themselves from the impact of your existence. You're not the storm, you're the pressure drop before the storm, the shift that tells everything instinctual, something powerful is coming. That's why they keep pushing, poking, questioning. They want to pin you down with words the same way someone might pin a map to the wall. But you aren't a map. You're the terrain, unpredictable, vast, and not designed for their shortcuts. My dear chosen ones, understand this deeply. When you stop explaining yourself, your presence becomes too raw for them, too unfiltered, too real. Without your explanations, your energy has no buffer, and suddenly they can't hide behind the excuses they built to protect their ego. Your silence forces them to confront their own stagnation. It makes them question why they settle, why they move so small, why they keep choosing comfort over growth. And that confrontation, it terrifies them. People don't fear what they can't understand. They fear what forces them to understand themselves. That's you. You're the internal mirror they didn't ask for, but desperately need. Your presence alone shakes their mental hierarchy, and they don't have the emotional vocabulary to handle that shift. That's why the questions come rapid fire. What did you mean by that? Why did you do that? What are you trying to say? Notice it's never about connection. It's always about control. They want you to keep talking so they can feel safer. Every explanation you give acts like a little anchor for them. Something familiar, something predictable. But the moment you go quiet, the moment you stop offering explanations like breadcrumbs, they lose their grip. Suddenly, you're not something they can summarize. You're something they must reckon with. And reckoning requires self-awareness, which is something they've spent years avoiding. Watch closely, chosen one. The ones who demand explanations the loudest are always the ones most intimidated by your evolution. Their questions aren't innocent, their fear disguised as curiosity. You can hear the tremor in their voice, the tightening in their tone. Behind every "but why would you do that?" is a panicked whisper. Please give me something to hold on to. I can't stand how unpredictable you are. But being unpredictable isn't your flaw, it's your freedom. Your silence is not emptiness, it's authority. It's the refusal to shrink your complexity into something small enough for them to swallow. Every time you stop explaining, you reclaim power they hoped you'd never notice. Your silence cuts off their illusion that they had a say in who you are. It removes the comfort of thinking they can interpret you, contain you, or reduce you. They can't shrink what doesn't speak on command. They can't limit what refuses to justify itself. And that loss of control? It terrifies them more than any truth you could say out loud. Remember this, chosen one. Your presence was never meant to make them comfortable. It was meant to reveal their limits. When you stop explaining yourself, you stop feeding their illusion. And that's when your difference finally speaks at full volume. And with that, my dear chosen ones, you can finally see the pattern for what it is, not a misunderstanding, but a reaction to your undeniable difference. This is the moment you stop translating your power and start standing in it without apology. If this message hit you in the places you've been afraid to acknowledge, show it. Like this video, subscribe to our channel, and drop 77 in the comments to claim your evolution. Share this with someone who's ready to stop explaining and start becoming. Your rise isn't coming, it's already happening.